capturing a market that was highly unstructured. You know, Oyo has just changed the face of hospitality in India. What have you accomplished so far, and where do you expect to go in the future?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with...
Very basic question.
You know, very basic. So, you know, clearly, when we started Oyo 3.5 years back, clearly across the country, India has been one of the best hospitality markets in the world. When you look at the best five-star hotels, Oberoi and Taj sort of are on the top of your mind, regardless of which part of the world you come from. It was sad that at the same time, when you looked at economy and mid-scale hotels in India, you wouldn't say that you know, anything close to similar existed. So it was an opportunity that always existed. For 20 years, everyone who got out of railway stations, airports, and so on knew that why don't we have good quality economy and mid-scale hotels. So we did not come up with any amazing idea. We just tried to solve the basic problem of saying, how do we get a common Indian user a beautiful living space to live in? In that process, I think, you know, in the last 3.5 years, we've learned our lessons. The following were the lessons. If you want to solve a problem as large as this, in an industry as old as ours, so if you look at the world's oldest companies, the two oldest companies are one hotel at Scotland and the other hotel at Japan. So that's how old our industry across the world, right? So that's the industry we're trying to solve this problem with. The solutions tend to be very hard, expensive, but the outcome very valuable. So let me talk about the 4 core solutions that we were able to bring. The first one was being able to partner the old age real estate and convince them why they need to upgrade their places into becoming fancier, chic, and so on and so forth. Today, roughly $20 billion worth of real estate would partner us exclusively for the distribution partnerships. Well, I know $20 billion worth of real estate means nothing. That's like hits on internet, but that's probably one of the metrics we track internally. We've got 300 civil engineers, interior designers, stylists working every day to upgrade these places. 14 institutes training kids and graduating them so that they can come in and work at our hotels and provide a certain level of customer service. Millions of room nights being booked and serviced. Which means unlike most Western markets, when you sort of say, hey, I need to set up an economy hotel chain, you get all of these things, services, right? You have to go out and fix all of these at the ground. But good news is that's where the value creation is. You talked about e-commerce and just the way it has evolved over time. 20 years back, you know, eBay was a darling of stock markets. Everyone was going long on eBay and short on Amazon. But just because they continue to invest in the core of saying, I'm going to make sure that the fulfillment experience is truly amazing every time the customer delivers it. 20 years out, it is exceptionally valuable, probably unsexy in the early days. So we are probably in our unsexy period at this point of time.
I think that continues to be the theme for e-commerce. I feel, you know, there is so much that needs to be done. We've just got started. You talked about 5% of supply in the Southeast Asia, but in India, less than 2% of commerce is happening online right now. So just getting started, yet a long way to go. Ashish, when I was growing up and I wanted to watch a movie, it was just going to the box office was an absolutely dreaded experience. This lack of transparency completely. There were touts, there was the black market. You've changed all of that completely, and not just for movies, for much more beyond that. Events have become so much more approachable. What was the genesis of BookMyShow?
Smoking and drinking.
Oh, that's the best.
So I don't smoke, and I don't have a problem with people smoking, but I used to work for J. Walter Thompson, which was a smoking office. It was like the Mad Men series. Everybody around you smoked. It was carpeted flooring. It got to me because I'm a health freak. I sail boats on the weekend. I like the fresh air and the sun. And here I was in an organization which I absolutely loved, but everybody smoked around me. So I wanted to clear my head metaphorically and physically. And so I decided to take all my savings in '99 and go on a backpacking trip to South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Botswana. And when I was traveling from Joburg to Cape Town, I heard a radio commercial trying to sell rugby tickets online. And I'm like the Forrest Gump guy. I've been born and raised in a 1 kilometer radius in Bombay, and I've never stepped outside anywhere. And here I was on a holiday, and I said, gosh, this is so easy because there's a structural hole in India. There's arbitrary pricing and scalping. There is no democratization of information, and the experience is a shit experience. You're a customer. It's like going to Starbucks and saying, here's my credit card or cash, and somebody's knocking on the knuckles and saying, screw you, I don't want your money. So you'd stand in a line at a cricket match overnight, get lathi charged and beaten up with batons by the cops because the line would get unruly, and then when you reach the box office, the guide say, hey, tickets are sold out, but all the scalpers are selling you tickets at 5x the price. And so I said, I started mulling over it, and then I reached Cape Town, and they have this little wine-growing region called Stellenbosch, which is like the Napa in the US. And I am a Sindhi, which is considered the Jews of India, and then I am from India, where there's a land of scarcity. And everybody, when they give you a glass of wine, gets very snooty, and everybody's taking the Merlots and cabs and swirling them, spitting them, and talking about the wine. And I'm from India, land of scarcity. I'm getting free wine. I kept drinking from 11 in the morning till 3. I was so smashed, I was so hammered, that I woke up the next morning at 8 o'clock in a youth hostel on a bunk bed, which wasn't mine. But I had sent the most expensive text message of my life to my boss saying, I'm quitting because I want to come back and build a business. And she had said, okay. And the text message at that time was 169 rupees from South Africa to India. And it was really expensive, and again, metaphorically and actually. And so I came back, and I started building a business plan. And in a week's time, those were the dot-com boom days, I got invested by Chase Capital Partners, JP Morgan. I didn't have a current bank account. They put $500,000 in my savings bank account. I could have taken the money and run. Here I'm 19 years on. And then I got invested by News Corp in 2001. And the scale that you're talking about, I've lived through it. There was no scale. There was no ecosystem from 99 to 2002. I went from 150 people down to 6, including office helper. I had to look at 144 people in the eye very early days of my life at the age of 27 and say, the dream is over. They had all quit jobs for me. Took them to Shivaji Park because I couldn't afford a conference room like that. But I negotiated hard with News Corp, got them a 6-month severance package, went and mortgaged my mom's house and raised $100,000 and bought back the company, and I promised I'd pay her back in 10 years. I paid her back in 18 months. Didn't switch on my lights and electricity and made phone calls at public STD booths to make calls to clients. And in 2007, the market turned again, and that's when we sort of launched the brand in its current avatar. Today, as far as we are concerned, BookMyShow has 1,600 people. We're in 4 geographies. We're in 660 cities and towns. We sell 15 million tickets a month. We cater to we have about 128 million visits. We have 70 million subs with about 35 million monthly active users, and we get about 3 billion page views. And like Ritesh said, we're just getting started.
Phenomenal. Phenomenal. So that's in true spirit of GES. The more entrepreneurial stories we all hear, the more inspired we are. And as one of my colleagues told me yesterday, these are all ripple effects. I remember hearing a story of a similar entrepreneur and thinking, I can do it too. Ashish, that was absolutely amazing. So moving on, scaling up. You talked about scaling up. We're just getting started. You talked about scaling up, and you also talked about some of the misses early on as well. Let's talk about that a little bit, and maybe Ashish, we can start with you. But I'd love to get all 3 of your opinions in that. So when we talk about entrepreneurship, e-commerce, scaling up versus a path to profitability, and we've all gone through. Some or the other toss up, do we focus on profitability? Do we just focus on scaling up? What is the right thing to do? And what is the right way for a lot of the entrepreneurs who are sitting here to think about just scaling up because the market is just getting started versus actually thinking about profitability as well?
Firstly, do whatever sell job you want to investors, but be true to yourself and don't listen to them after that. I mean, everybody wants to put you on a treadmill and run hard. Let's do a reality and fact check. While India is a phenomenal market and the GDP is growing and all of that is great, there is a difference between the universe and the TAM. And here is a fact check. There's 1.2 billion Indians. There are 900 million handsets. There are 500 million smartphones. There are 350 million data connections. There are only 26 million credit cards in this country owned by 12 million Indians. There are only 500 million bank accounts. 10% of this country owns 37% of the GDP. The bottom 40% only controls 5% of the GDP. If the guy doesn't have food to eat, which is such a sad metric, what are you going to sell him? a hotel room, shoes to run, and a movie ticket to go to. He doesn't know where his next meal is coming from. So I think we've got to have a reality check, and entrepreneurs, first of all, know in their gut what is right, what is wrong. The investor's job is to enter, to exit at some point of time. He wants to put you on a treadmill and run at 12 kilometers an hour and sell it to the next guy. That's not how businesses are built. And in America, you could be a third-generation entrepreneur by the time you're 43, but in India, it takes time, and it takes 7 to 12 years. It's an enormous problem to solve, but you will reap the benefits of really changing lives and changing people and creating some significant value for yourself. As far as scaling is concerned, what BookMyShow did was very early on in its days, we focused on the top 10% of the market, which in itself is 120 million people. It's not a small market. Now with Jio coming in and with a lot of sort of, disruption in the mobile space, the market's growing really rapidly. 90% of the internet goes through that one telecom provider, 9x growth in YouTube in the last 12 months. So after 19 years, I can actually see the next 5 years are going to be very exciting. But as an entrepreneur, you're always optimistic. Somebody says, the pessimist says the glass is half empty. The optimist says it's half full. As an entrepreneur, I look at this empty section and I say, hey, listen, I can add some scotch. Either I'm going to be too drunk to care or I'm going to enjoy the drink. So, that's how you look at life.
So I do think one of the key takeaways from this session should be that listen to the entrepreneurs, listen to the investors when you're trying to raise money. After that, do what's right by you.
I don't mean it literally, but I'm just saying
that
a lot,
fair. I think all of us would agree with
a lot of entrepreneurs behave like investors where when they build a business, they're talking about an exit. Hey, I'm going to exit in four years. Or you know what, my company is a $1 billion company, it's a unicorn. Or why aren't you thinking about, what you're trying to do, does it solve a problem? Are you excited? And is the consumer or the user at the center of your universe? Is the empty chair here does it belong to the customer? And I think this whole valuation and how fast can I grow and only looking at one metric. Nobody talks about an NPS. Nobody talks about profitability. Now they're talking about the light at the end of the tunnel. It's single unit metrics. What is the CAC? Why don't you talk about CAC over LTV? I mean, those are some real hard questions people need to ask. It's not about land grab, it's about building a business. Whether it's the internet or whether it's nuts and bolts or whether it's brick and mortar, it's a business at the end of the day.
Not agree more. Ritesh?
So I agree with Ashish on one and disagree on one. Okay, not disagree, but sort of disagree. I agree with Ashish on saying that this is not a short-term play, this is a marathon. And this is a marathon that you need to run like you're in a sprint situation, right? So it's hard. It's hard because you go through all those days when you have to look at people in the eye and say that dream's over, and then you have to look at thousands more people in the eye and say that the dream's back again, and still work with all of them through your lifestyle. So I fully agree with that. I think the second bit is I feel generally the Indian internet has been very top 12 million focused. But I feel on the other hand, India is a much larger consumer opportunity. On one side, India's FMCG companies look at a TAM of 600 million people. Go to any small village across the country, you will see the Levers, you'll see the Britannias, the Procter & Gambles, everyone having a separate business unit just running that. Ola already operates in 100 plus cities. We operate in 160 cities, very distributed business operations. Our view of the world is the opportunity is much bigger than what the usual internet companies see, and ShopClues has seen the advantage of it, which is primarily focusing in a lot of people who are coming on the internet for the first time. But with that said, coming to the question of profitability versus growth, I think everyone has a different view on it, so I will just share mine personally. I'm a lot more old school in that view. I feel that investment and burn are two completely different things. I feel that investing in capabilities is absolutely okay, and if that means that you're not profitable, so be it. Because at the end, those capabilities are going to monetize in significant volumes, and I'd like to share some examples. If you have exceptional capabilities of delivering faster than ever before, you will monetize. When Amazon was being shorted for the longest time, people didn't see that, but now has a 35% bottom line at the end of the tunnel. If you have, Facebook is another example of it, which was losing tons of capital when Microsoft invested $15 billion. People said, these guys are crazy. Why would somebody invest $15 billion? Probably the best corporate investments in the history of mankind, in which, they turned the flip, made, Alibaba, one of our shareholders, SoftBank, invested in them long back. By the way, they just do $2 trillion in transactions. Jack felt that he wants to make a profit, so he makes 2% margin. By the way, that's $4 billion, which makes complete sense. So building capabilities makes sense. I think burning capital, which is what I was just talking to Ashish, and you're saying that if you just care about top line, if I stand right outside the convention center and start handing out the new 50 rupees bills, then nice, they look beautiful. If you start handing them out, there'll be a huge queue of people wanting to take that. So that's probably something that I don't believe in personally, but investing in capabilities, please, always welcome, and will create value all throughout your lifetime.
So here's the thing, right? All of us are working in emerging markets, which means that we're whatever 1% done, 2% done, which means that we have to create trials, somehow change behaviors amongst customers who've not been used to this. And while I agree with everything that they said, I think there's just one more dimension to that, which is when you're thinking about scale versus profitability, to generate scale, you have to create trust, right? And inherently, there is lack of trust in emerging markets like India or like Indonesia or like Thailand or like some of the markets that we're in, right? Philippines, Malaysia. So when there is lack of trust, and you have to create that behavior, or it's completely entirely new, or you're creating a new sector, you're changing a behavior, it's okay to invest in it as long as you are net generating trust, right? If you're not, like he said, if you're handing out $50 bills, that's not generating trust. That's just, that's something is seriously wrong with giving like that sort of cashbacks or things like that. But if you're generating trials and therefore you're not making money, because you're going to invest that in scale because you are inherently changing a consumer's behavior, that's okay. And I think as entrepreneurs, right, we have to be really true to ourselves. Very quickly we can tell whether, and we may not know it at the beginning, whether we're just generating trials or we're just wasting money to grow metrics like GMV, which actually don't matter to the founders as much as it does to investors or people who are trying to raise or sell. So inherently, if you're talking about scale and if you're doing things that change the behavior and generate trust, it's okay. But if you have no idea how that is going to go down a path of profitability, and as a founder, you always know that, whether that's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, I think that's where that's one of those decision points where you know whether you're going to make it or not. For me personally, that's a good check of scale versus profitability.
So it's great, we all have a very clear view of how we are building out our business and where we plan to take it going forward. And but as we scale up, there are some bottlenecks that come up, whether that's infrastructure, whether it is, I know in India, about 3 years ago, we expected internet penetration to go up much faster than it has actually happened. And where do these remedies lie? What kind of support do you expect from the government in this? And keeping in mind that Niti Aayog is here all over the place, and we've all been invited by Niti Aayog to come in and talk about our experiences as entrepreneurs. Maybe we can start with you, Ankiti. Where is it? What should the government be doing? And let's talk about your government as well. So.
Sure. So I think that's a nuanced answer, and let me start with, this is my personal view, of course. When you compare India to some other markets, one of the most obvious things, and India is a very complicated market to solve for, right? We're a really large country, a democracy on top of it, and a good one. So it makes it hard to implement solutions in a dogmatic fashion several times. However, having said that, India has certain problems, like Radhika said, right? Growth rates, internet penetration, etc., not moving at the speed at which we all, or rather analysts, have estimated time and time again. And I used to be a McKinsey analyst, so I know that some of those numbers are, estimated in a certain way. But India has not really followed through. And I think some of those problems are fairly macroeconomic. Some of those are very social, right? Such as per capita income, such as gender distribution, women's participation in the workforce, right? And that has been a general theme at GES this year, and it's such an important thing that if you know, half of your population is not contributing to the economy the way that they should, it is going to be incredibly hard for us to double up our per capita income, which is incredibly important for consumer internet companies to succeed, right? So while we are all thinking about India and TAM in a certain way, like Ashish said, if you want to talk about not the top 10% of India, then you have to start looking at who the rest of India is, and who has disposable income in the rest of India, and who's making the buying decisions. So I think at some level, we in India, as Indians, we have a long way to go compared to several other markets, and that can be said about a lot of emerging economies, which is not true of some of the markets that are obviously a little bit more developed, where you know, women are 50% of the workforce, or you know, even in a country such as Indonesia, where in the lower income group also, 86% is female to male ratio in the workforce. So automatically that switches up distribution, that actually really powers consumer internet growth, because a lot of decisions are actually driven by women. So if you had to ask me what, you know, what the government could do to really help the consumer internet companies, it's actually perhaps at that sort of basic level of understanding that some of the problems are about income distribution, and the genderedness of income distribution. Yeah.
Okay, so you know, 50% of Indian population is below the age of 25. Great, right? On the other hand, the official elected, you know, to stand up in elections in India, the official minimum age is 25. So basically, the people who are writing the rules and the regulations for people in India have nothing to do with the people who are actually going to be impacted with those rules and regulations. So not that I'm saying that all potential elected representatives should be below the age of 25. I'd love that, but I know that it could have some repercussions. You know, the entire country might be Goa, which is great, just a few. But you know, I just believe that that's very important, that the government starts listening and understanding what the next generation really needs and sort of expects from its new government. I think we are very, as a company and as a young citizen of this country, I'm very proud to, you know, have seen in the last 3 years how the government's ears are so close to the ground. You know, when GES happens, it doesn't have, you know, the $100 billion family, you know, rich coming here. These are first-generation entrepreneurs creating and solving problems. So I feel very happy about the work that's happened in the last few years, but there's a long way for us to go. And the hope is someday people who are 25 years or lesser in age will have more in terms of say in what rules and regulations are being written, other than just voting. So that's probably one aspiration I'd have in the future.
So, look, I've been around too long, and my view of government versus no government, and it's changed, like Ritesh said, but I always believe that if you want to succeed in China, you want to be close to the government. But if you want to succeed in India, you want to be as far away from the government. And all traditional businesses are all screwed up because the government was too involved in their lives. And the reason why KPOs, BPOs, and internet businesses did so well, because nobody in the government bloody knew what we were up to. And then we became too large for them to fail and say anything, and now they're all supporting us. However, I think I've seen a new breed of bureaucracy. Amitabh is a friend. Niti Aayog has been drawing me. I've always stayed away from the government. Champions of change happened in Delhi. The government in Telangana at the bureaucracy level and at the ministerial level, the government in Tamil Nadu, the government in Maharashtra. I think we have a fiduciary system, and therefore at the state level, I'm seeing this new breed of either ministers or bureaucrats which really mean business. And they're transparent, they're straightforward, they're plain speak, and I like that, because there's no bullshitting, right? They tell you to your face what's right, what's not. And what I've also liked is they're listening to entrepreneurs and people and saying, how can I help you? Like, I'll give you an example, and to that point earlier, look, I'm not saying that the rest of India is not important, but the fact is that in India we sell 2 billion movie tickets, which is all of Africa, Middle East, North America, and Europe put together. But we have only 12 screens per million people in India as opposed to 128 screens per million people in the US, as opposed to 30 in China, which has now grown to 64 in the last 4 years. In India, we are still at 12, and this is for the last 50 years. The policies which give the land, the taxation, if I want to do a Bruno Mars or an Ed Sheeran concert, which I did last month, and then I did an A.R. Rahman concert a few days back in Hyderabad, the GST is 28. In Malaysia, it's 5%. The free tickets that you're supposed to give in Kuala Lumpur is only 20 by law. Here, I have to at least give 1,000 or 1,500 tickets. And then you have to pay under the table to actually get things done. But there is a new breed of bureaucrats and ministers who are saying, no, we will help you solve this problem. How do you get the transport ministry? You get the city mayoral system, which we don't have because everything is fragmented. How do you then get the cultural ministry and the tourism ministry and the sports ministry to come together to deliver an event in the city which gets taxes for that city and economic value for the city and creates jobs for the city? Now, when I go to an international city, there's a mayoral system. He ties everything up for me. Here, the chief minister does not control the city because there's a mayor who doesn't have teeth. But then there are different ministries that don't want to come together, and that's really the problem, right? So, mind you, there are companies which are in 100 cities, 150 cities. BookMyShow is in 650 cities and towns. We're not talking, so the way we look at our world is top 2, next 5, next 28, and focus 60. And our first obligation is to fix that problem while we are present in the others, because the task is so enormous, it's so large, that it's not going to get solved so quickly.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to it. He's absolutely right in saying that the new age of bureaucrats are just changing a lot of things. So, for example, I must talk about Hyderabad. Jayesh should be here somewhere. I saw him earlier. He's in a session outside. I met him right here earlier. He's been in the Telangana government, and I met him 5 months back, and I told about this whole civil engineering lab thing that we wanted to set up. And since then, they have taken the responsibility of getting NICMA involved, making sure that the lab comes in. We already have a team now set up in Hyderabad who are doing this work in 4 months flat. So they're moving very aggressively from being just enablers to actually influencers, of saying that not only are we going to enable you to be successful, but we're going to work with you to make you more successful so that our states get more employment and corresponding advantages.
Amitabh, you just walked in on cue like a movie star. I said some really good things about Niti and not some very good things about the government. And you just walked in.
The timing was perfect, Amitabh. And I'm going to go back to something that Ritesh mentioned earlier. You talked about, a majority of the country being under 25 years of age and none of the government representation being under 25 of age. Let's talk about 50% of the population that is just missing from either most of the government as well, from any of the decision makers, the women. They're not here. They're here, of course, and a big hand to everybody who is here. I think we should give a big hand to all the women entrepreneurs. But what is our responsibility? And I'll tell you, as a woman entrepreneur, I believe that me, Ankiti, we've done our share. It's time for the men to step up and change the narrative.
So
it is time for the men to step up and say that, yes, we are ready.
And you're not just ready, we're going to work together to make this happen. I think it is absolutely important, and especially I'm very lucky to be, again, a part of this generation which is going to see this huge movement. None of our next generation people would hopefully need to have this discussion even on the dais to say, how are we going to enable opportunities? That should be table stakes. So from our perspective, I have two responsibilities. One as a young entrepreneur and one as somebody who's running a company which has decent impact around ourselves in the society. I think in terms of beginning with our partners, which form the core of our business, we have enabled hundreds of hospitality entrepreneurs who are women, who do a much better job. And again, I know we should make sure that it is all fair to both genders, but to do an exceptional job of the hospitality that they enable for customers. Townhouse is one of our new upper mid-segment hotels that we brought up. Amitabh's been kind to say, you should not do your economy thing, you should just do townhouses. In that process, we've made 50% women recruitment for front offices mandatory. It's hard, but the outcome of it is fabulous. We feel our customers don't care, they won't notice, but we're already seeing customers notice saying, hey, in townhouses, getting there is easier because we know there'll be a women receptionist at some point of the day. As a company, we feel that both at the board, at the management, and then all the way to the last level in the company, it is very important to start pushing aggressively for women representation, and not as if it's a pain or a pressure, but just talking about the impact and the positive advantages it has, because you have a concern of rubbing it the wrong way if you are trying to push it on people. But when people realize that if you have women at the board, they can bring representation of a lot of matters that companies won't know or won't care about, and you might have situations like that of Uber 5 years later, you would much rather solve for them in the entry stages. So I feel that these are important priorities. We are aggressively driving this, both from partnership, internal teams, as well as on the third side, making sure that our customer base in terms of women customers have special experiences that we can solve for. I'd like to add something. GES for me is personally very transformational because I have seen 3 very big Niti events, if I were to say. There was one which was the huge Startup India. Then there was Change Makers, which Ashish earlier talked, Champions of Change was great. Both of these, you would see the undercurrents already showcasing that there's significant amount of women entrepreneurs in there. But this one, it almost is, around yourself, you would see women. In almost every dice, you would see women leading the charge. Around yourself, almost every booth you see, you would see women entrepreneurs being put up. I think that's a great change where it is not an undercurrent anymore, it's out there. And I feel that if it begins there, a lot of us will start thinking about that being a priority. If we do it, a lot of our team members will think about it. And then hopefully, like I said in the beginning, the next generation of us should not need to have this discussion. It should be table stakes that, regardless of the gender, opportunities should be equal.
I just want to add to that, right? It's very true when Ritesh said that consumers see it. Basically, I think what has happened is that there was the old boys club making all economic, business, and governance decisions. And that was for an old boys club world where old boys club was also making the buying decisions, right, in households. And as there's more diversity in the consumers, if decisions are made by the old boys club, that company is going to fail. And eventually, that government is going to also have a problem. And the sooner the old boys club realizes that they need to shake it up a bit to stay relevant and therefore make the economics work, I think that's when things start shifting. So I think the whole gender issue is not just a social issue or a moral issue anymore. It's a legit economics issue, which is perhaps why men are taking it so seriously. I know I sound a little sort of bitter when I say that, but it's definitely a matter of economics, and I'm glad that it's being taken seriously one way or the other. But it's definitely a matter of economics now.
I'd like to add to that, for India's GDP growth, it is absolutely necessary that India has significant women population working. I mean, look at any economy that grows at 8-10% YOY. India has just 15% participation from women. Right. If you don't have 1 in 2 women participation, like, we travel to China very often, and it is just impossible to see places where women are not leading the charge. One of our shareholders, China Lodging Group, in the board group, in the management group, there is 60% representation of women. So,
and unfortunately in India, we are yet to see that. But the change is evident, and I think hats off to GES as well. Ashish, would you like to add something to that?
Look, it's a tough problem to solve. And I'll tell you, our own internal SAD metric is that 26% of BookMyShow's workforce is women, but only 2% of our leadership team is women. And what we're trying to do, we're a very altruistic company, and our philosophy and our purpose in life, and I guess it comes with time, has been to draw from society and give back and create value. And I'll give you a few examples. I run a program called BookASmile, which basically is cheating and skimming millions of Indians of money. It should actually be an opt-in, but I made it an opt-out, which is Times New Roman gray, and you miss it. And I'm collecting 1 rupee every time you buy a ticket from BookMyShow, and I'm cheating. But I'm building good karma for 68% of my customers. So we are supporting a program from Yuva where these Jharkhand girls, 300 of them, I'm training them for their soccer program for the last 3 years. 8 of them went for a UEFA Level 1 training to Real Sociedad. And these are girls that have come from this place outside of Ranchi, which is about 130 kilometers outside of Ranchi. And they are being trained. They come from very impoverished backgrounds. Some of their mothers have been acid and rape victims. And they're ostracized in society. And we've taken them. And there's a huge confidence that we've seen in these girls. We also support a program for Just for Kicks for Girls in Dharavi in Bombay. And then we get these girls once a quarter to come and jam with us in our office. Now, the other thing that we've done is all the toilets in BookMyShow are common toilets. There's no outside toilet. It's a common toilet. And the reason we do that is because, you know, you can have your Cocker Spaniel come in your bed, but you can't have another person who's socio-economically challenged to not use the same pot. And you have executive and regular loos in India. I mean, it's the same shit. If you open the sewer, can you identify yours with somebody else? I don't understand this logic. And so we have the same. We have a food program that is run in the company. For women in the company, we have a Vishaka committee, which is A, mandated, and secondly, we run a very, very strong Vishaka committee. Over and above that, we have a voluntary fund in the company where we are training all the outsourced staff, which is our janitors, which come from an outsourced agency. We pay for Mediclaim bills for 1,600 employees, even if they're outsourced, for themselves, the spouse, 2 children, and a set of parents. And insurance from last year, all paid, no copay by the company. And we run a food program where all of us pay a premium, and everybody else below 30,000 rupees salary pays only 20 rupees, because 3 years ago when I spoke to some of the folks and they said, I eat 20 rupees worth of bananas or rice or 2 vada pavs just to keep my energy levels up, and you'll see a lot of people just having glucose Parle-G biscuits. And a lot of this impact is to the women which are getting not the best jobs.
So I love all the CSR initiatives that you're talking about.
And we're not supposed to do this.
But women are not a charitable...
No, they're not. No, don't get me wrong,
I think
please.
that there has to be a difference there.
No, I know that. I'm saying this is not a problem that I created. It's a problem that I see, and it is a problem that I'm willing to walk the walk and walk the talk. That's all I'm saying. And at the leadership level itself, we're inducting 2 new board advisors, which we have said will be reserved for women. So we're working at both ends of the spectrum. But if there is a societal issue, I'm trying to solve it what is in my means and in my control. I'm not doing charity, but I feel that I'm obligated to as a company and as an organization to do that. And so we're doing it.
So very impressive, everything that BookMyShow is doing. But I think where the problem comes up, and I'd love to get your point of view on that as well, Ankiti, is that women, there is a top of funnel problem. There's absolutely no doubt about it. When you talk about the fact that you have 2 board seats that are mandated for women, but they're not full because you don't know who to get on that, there is a top of funnel problem. But I think there is a bit of a viewpoint difference over here, where we see that we are working for the underprivileged and we're working for women. There's a distinct difference there. Ankiti?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's one aspect where you're trying to uplift a certain segment of society, and then when you say, and I love everything that you're doing at BookMyShow, but there's one sort of tone of upliftment and the other tone of making you an equal shareholder or partner in an outcome, right? Certainly, India has a top of the funnel problem. Certain many Asian societies do. And I think that only changes over time when there are enough women decision makers also, right? So if you have an entire panel full of men making decisions about women's lives and women's health and women's reservations, that is certainly a problem. But definitely that can change only when there are also women on the other side. But the solution is never in trying to treat it like a charitable cause, of course, while doing charity at the same time. It isn't genuinely trying to build, invest in mentoring, coaching. I mean, I would love for you guys as male leaders to be allies to female potential leaders, right? Like, absolutely, I think that's important.
I think that is absolutely
One of the
critical.
most important things in my life has been that having male allies.
So when we talk about top of the funnel problem, you know, and I'll tell you, we face that too. And I want as many women as we can in our team as well. And it's a struggle. Because the fact is that as women, there are not enough mentors around. And this has been a phenomenal platform because we've seen women moderate most of the discussions around. In spite of that, there have been a couple of panels where there's been, we're talking about investing in women-owned enterprises, and there's one woman, and there's mostly men. I must have pitched to about 1,500 investors across, and I've pitched to about 2 women. Just not there. So I think it's all our responsibility not just of the people sitting on the panel, but pretty much everyone over here to make sure that we either give a chance of equal participation or we mentor the new
Exactly.
generation.
Like as a woman entrepreneur, I think for me, the most useful thing is that because we have a role model gap, it's useful to have male role models also who are willing to mentor you and be your ally. Right? That's actually incredibly important because there are 5 women entrepreneurs in Asia anyway, maybe 10. So we're all already mentoring each other.
So quick time check. This has been a great discussion. We're going to open it up for audience questions. Just put your hand up, and we have a few mics around. You can just point out which panelist you'd like to ask the question to, and we'll be happy to answer. If it's a generic question, all of us can pitch in.
An entrepreneur. My question is scaling up. All your discussions have been very interesting. So I wanted to understand, we all talk about scaling up, and maybe every entrepreneur here has a different definition of what scaling up. But could you, in your own words, like clearly break down what is scaling up? And another factor that I've picked up, you've used the Indian market as an example a lot. I think you forgot about the rest of us, but anyway, we sort of share the same challenges in Africa. So what I have picked from most of the sessions, and I especially want to pick out Mr. Fernando, the one of Dilma Tea, he really touched me because he talked about when you build your business that you also think about sharing your profits with the less, like you're talking about women or your workers. So it sort of made me thinking, maybe when we talk about scaling up, we're only thinking of the financial aspect. But could scaling up also deal with like bettering the team around you, bettering the systems? Like, can we define what's scaling up? Because scaling up is like always about the profits. But if we want to be good to the human race, what is truly scaling up?
So I can sort of try and answer that. That's what I was trying to sort of allude to. That the purpose and the goal at BookMyShow has been very different over the last 3 or 4 years. By the way, BookASmile, which is our charity, is an all-women team, led by Farzana Kama and led by all 4. So the whole orientation towards women comes from that team and not from me. Also, what I said is that we're training 11 of our office boys in the company through night college right now. And the education for any worker in the company below a certain salary is free of cost, funded by a voluntary fund that we've created in the company, which is pre-salary before it comes to you. So with what we're doing with BookASmile, the altruism of the company, what we are trying to do with consumers and drawing them in, the work that we do, I think there is a lot that we're anyways doing, even though we are not obligated under the government as CSR because you have to get it out of your profits, etc. We're just doing it out of our free will. So you're right, it's not a metric that we only look at profits at least for ourselves, but we are seeing if we can better lives through insurance, through Mediclaim, through a food program in the company, through education, and through BookASmile by giving out into the community and seeing if that makes an impact. It's a very, very important and dear subject to us. BookASmile is not an NGO, but a part of the company. We've not farmed it out as a trust, but we actually have it inside the company, and it has metrics which are sat on every annual operating plan every month. So, I mean, you're right. Profits without a conscience mean nothing to us.
So I'd like to add to that. So most of us sitting here are trying to change the way the consumer behaves, right? But beyond that, there is a social element to all the businesses over here. I'll talk a little bit about what we do at ShopCruise. We work with about 600,000 small and medium merchants. 1/3 of them are women. who work from their homes, who have the ability to create a livelihood for themselves, which they would have possibly not had if e-commerce had not come down knocking down their doors. So while we look at P&Ls are important, financial metrics are important, but the kind of impact that we are having, not just on our consumers, but on our merchants as well, the kind of employment we are generating. So each one of our merchant lands up hiring about 3 people. So kind of employment that we're generating, these are all metrics of social impact, which are very critical for us as well to be able to measure our success.
I'd like to add to that, just taking a minute. We've got 10 more minutes, so we'll hopefully finish it up before a minute. It is, clearly for our kind of companies, the next generation companies, social impact is very, very dear. As a principle, our company does not talk about any of the causes that we work towards because we believe that becomes a little bit of a chest-thumping drive. But outside of that, outside of helping the kids at Kakinada, outside of enabling education, we believe that companies have a great role to play in country building as well. So I had the opportunity, today if you look at it, as a company we've been able to in 3.5 years bring jobs to close to 100,000 people. These are full-time jobs, people all the way from minimum wage to data scientists from across the world. The ability to make sure, so I had the opportunity to have dinner with Prime Minister Modi last time during Changemakers, and he mentioned something very interesting. He said, how many employees work in the company? I said, directly or indirectly, within the company, there's 6,000 people, and then outside the company, we enable contractual employment for others. He asked, can the 6,000 people give me 2 ideas that they take responsibility of, and for the next 5 years, they will work on making the new India, because it's not my job to make the new India. I'm just an enabler. But can each one of them put those 2 ideas up? So we run a campaign inside the company where everyone put 2 ideas up, and every 6 months, when we have the big town hall, 5 of them come up and share what they have done for nation building outside of the usual businesses that we operate. My personal mission has been that 10% of India's population should see beautiful living spaces for the first time in their life and then think, why is my house not like this? And hopefully increase their quality of living while continuing to do what we're doing.
Thank you. Let's take a question then.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Lakshmi from Ink Talks. My question to all of you is really about retaining women. And I'll tell you, I'm much older than all of you, so I can say this with authority, that a lot of the women's problems are in their heads also. I think they take it upon themselves to be the primary caregiver. In all my conferences I've ran, it's for sure, it's the women who drop out as speakers. It's the most frustrating thing for me because they take on too much. What are you doing in your own companies to train women to be unapologetic about asking for what they want? I think they talk themselves down too much. They take the back seat very, very quickly, and there's all kinds of statistics about it. I would love to know what you each are doing to retain women, especially after marriage, especially after having children.
Thanks, Lakshmi. That's a great question, and it's true. First of all, I'd like to address why, and we don't have a lot of time, so I'd quickly like to address why I think that happens, right? And as a young woman entrepreneur who's worked in tech and investing before, I know exactly what you're talking about. Less than 10% of every industry I've ever worked in was women. But the problem is actually also a lot of social conditioning that has happened since we were kids, right? So that's what we've seen in school, college, that's what we've seen in families. We expect that of ourselves. We don't necessarily always give each other the network and platform that we should be, like the bros do, or the bro clubs do. So one of the things that I've found very effective, and I actively do, is to mentor women differently from the way that I mentor men or coach men in my company, at least at Zilingo. Because it is required, like you said, right? You have to make them unlearn the dogmas of social conditioning that they already have in their mind and actively solve for it. Sometimes, there's actually evidence that says that if you give men and women the same test on how good they think they are on certain topics, women will rate themselves 6 when they are an 8, and men will rate themselves 9 when they're an 8. So there is a lot of psychology at play that you have to actively solve for. It's easier for us to do, since we're a 100 people company, we're a small team, we're 50% female, our leadership is 10% LGBTQ, 50% female, my board is 50% female. So here there's enough diversity at the leadership and the management level to actually make this very easy in the DNA of the company. It's a little tougher when the companies are a little less international because you have to then seriously think about how to solve for it. But I think you have to actively make an effort from right at the beginning of when the woman starts her career. It's easier, like Ritesh said, like our generation is obviously a lot more open-minded about these things, but we still have to invest a lot in making them unlearn the social stuff, right? And
So, Lakshmi, I'll take a quick 30 seconds because we are running out of time. When we started the company, for every male we hired, we would try to hire a woman as well. And as we scaled up, that went out of the window completely. Not for lack of trying. Because I can tell you, and we were out in the boonies in Gurgaon, where most of the women would come in with their parents for an interview. Because they wanted to be sure that they're working at a safe place. And in many ways, I felt like I was the token woman there. They're like, oh, koi aur hai, to theek hai, tum ja sakte ho. Sorry, there's another woman there, so you can go and work there, that's safe. So in many ways, I think the most important part, and I'll tell you what has worked for me, it's the right mentors. And it's the right mentors, not just the women, but also the men I work with. So it is very important for the men to mentor the women the right way as well.
completely agree.
The
I think I have a
narrative has to
tactical-
change, and it has to change with the men now.
I have sort of a tactical suggestion or something that I have seen work for our company. I sort of find it very I find it very simple from a perspective of how you look at your team members. So even a male team member would not be very excited to continue the challenges in life if he does not feel that the opportunities are endless outside of this. If he sees that if I do this, the life is going to be sunny, it's going to be great. So I feel that two things. First, the problem is really social. You know, how many times in a supermarket do you see a pregnant woman and feel okay about it? Like I've seen, someone I know, family starting to stare at them saying, why are you at, the supermarket? It's okay at the 5th month to be at the supermarket. There's no problems with that. So I think first being able to tell people that, you can really become very successful if you do well. That is when people will start challenging a lot of these social norms and saying that it doesn't matter because the opportunities are so amazing. I know a friend of mine who has an exceptional job, does really well at the place she's at, and finds that as a great opportunity and feels next 5 years are going to be great. I can tell you, she gets married, she gets kids, she's not going to leave her job because she feels that the opportunities are so exciting outside of this.
We have time for about one more question.
Hi, I am Anurag here. That's here.
Oh,
Yeah.
somebody already has the mic.
Yeah. So,
So we'll
waiting
take
for
two
my
more.
turn.
We'll take you as well.
I'm sorry for others.
Go ahead.
Just waiting for my turn to come. It was a really nice discussion which you had. Let me come up with a quick question because I was just waiting to hear something about e-commerce. So I wanted to know something which, the one thing which you feel that which we should consider in the, to build up the trust in e-commerce business in India. According to you, what will be the one thing? Because we are coming up with a edutech company, so I wanted to know something, the parameter which we should consider in building up the trust with the clients. Thank you.
Okay, so from my perspective, it's fairly clear. To create trust, you need to create a much better product in much lesser price. So the better product should make people feel, I'm not going back to what I used to do earlier, which is when you take an Uber, you feel like I'm never going back to the previous kind of taxis. And it has to be cheaper for people to say, it's too low cost for me to try for the first time. So I think these are two things, better and cheaper should probably.
In India, those celebrities build trust too. So if you can hire Shah Rukh Khan, that'll work.
Hello, good evening, sir. Go ahead. Yeah, I'm just curious to know that when will be the possibility of these online companies accepting the cryptocurrency like bitcoins as a mode of payment?
Already.
Like, all are accepting?
So, we've been discussing about it. I think the only problem is nobody wants to spend bitcoins anymore because the value is growing so fast. People are saying, let me just buy and keep it with myself. So once people start spending, then maybe we'll start working on accepting them.
You want to go ahead and ask? You've been asked.
Sorry,
Hello.
super quick. Sorry, I'm just curious about e-commerce. I come from the Pacific Islands and there's no e-commerce at all. So you guys are far, far advanced in your region of the world. I just want to know quickly, did you build your own platforms of e-commerce or did you use existing technology, and how'd you do it?
Build it on our own. So for us as well, we used an existing technology, but we built pretty much everything else, modified it for our audience.
We started as a brick and mortar hotel company, then we had no platform, we just built a static site, but over time we've built everything in-house.
We build everything, we design everything. At concerts, we even make our own food. So we don't outsource anything. It's all in-house.
I have a very specific question.
Last question.
Last one. So, what do you see the role of emerging technologies in e-commerce? For example, do you see a role for emerging technologies like virtual reality in e-commerce as enablers and gainers of trust? So, for example, interactive trailers instead of the normal trailers on BookMyShow, or interactive virtual reality hotel tours, which are immersive and interactive rather than just photographs. So, do you see a role for such technologies going forward in e-commerce?
See, I'll make it real. AI, DL, ML, blockchain sounds all sexy. I'll give you real examples. We've launched a jukebox product, radio. If you're listening to Kaigo and you increase the volume, I get data points to know that you will like Kaigo and similar music like that. Now, if I know there were 10,000 Kings of Leon's fans and 20,000 people listening to Dave Matthews Band in Delhi, then I can get that concert here. So it's very, very simple. You can call it DL, you can call it ML, you can call it AI, you can call it whatever. When you finish a movie and you watched it, I send you a push notification when you rate the movie. I know exactly how many people, and I give an algorithmic rating to the people that have actually watched the movie and a lower rating to the critics who are actually voting for that movie. I go back to distributors and cinemas after the first weekend and tell them Madras Cafe actually is going to lift over the next 2 weeks because we are seeing a better run of consumers saying, I want to see. So you can call it AI, ML, DL, blockchain, whatever that you want to call it, but this is just common sense. We're using data to enable business and to make a difference to consumers' lives. I mean, and of course we're using, of course we have data scientists, of course we have a team in Israel that's sitting, of course we have analytics teams, but you know, at the end of the day, how are you going to use that? Data is most important. So it starts with how are you going to use the data, how are you going to make a difference, use your common sense, and then technology will keep changing and the terminology will keep changing.
Yes,
With that, we'll end.
In a city